Welcome to this all access briefing. Very excited to be here with Emmy. Emmy has competed in cross country and track and field as an NCAA Division I scholarship athlete at Tulane University. Graduated from Columbia University with a doctorate in physical therapy. Now owns and operates her own PT practice with a focus on prehab, performance, and women's health. Last of all, is now a published author of the book Run Healthy, which, we'll do a little plug here. So, the runner's guide to injury prevention and treatment. So, amazing body of work there. Emmy, very excited to jump into this. I was just saying before we went live, I was telling Emmy that I'm excited to hear her talk. I'm confident I will learn something today, and I'm sure others will as also. So, thank you for being here, Emmy.
John, thank you so much for having me, and thanks so much for such a lovely bio. I'm happy to be here.
Oh, perfect. Did I forget anything? I mean, I've
No,
shared
that
many
was
things.
that was very thorough. The books, the latest things to add to the list, and definitely a endeavor not for the faint of heart. You heard me for years complaining about the not complaining, but I guess the challenges of writing a book.
Yeah.
It's definitely a big doozy. But
I
it's done, it's published, it's out in the world. I am so thrilled that it is done.
and now it's a tool for everybody to
Yeah.
use. So we'll get to the book a little bit because I'm curious about, but I want to ask, kind of start with an easy one, which I'm always curious what people are like personally doing, whether it's like work related
Mhm.
now or training related. So what do you have going on? At kind of what's the new best and brightest?
For me,
Yeah.
I am signed up for Berlin.
All
So
right.
I would say finally this week is like the first week where I feel like things are starting to click into place. I would say the first like 4 or 5 weeks of training, as you know, we like moved to Brooklyn. I had a couple personal things going on and just was not quite getting into the rhythm. I was a little bit beaten down by the heat, but I feel like finally kind of the mileage, the toughing out in the heat starting to click. I had a good workout Tuesday night with my running team. Got some very good easy runs in, which we'll talk about easy pace, I think, as we go through
Sure.
this.
Always.
Uh, yeah, that's that. That and then being in Brooklyn for the first time in my life. Moved here recently from Manhattan, so that's been a bit of an adjustment too.
Yeah.
But
Just across the river, but a very different place. So
very different place. The subways are not the same.
well, so I always find, and our kind of viewership has had the opportunity to hear Carly talk a lot. So I
Yeah,
find, you know, this like very cool intersection between running coaches and physical therapists because obviously your practices kind of feed on one another. So I sort of feel like you're in this unique perspective to really see, and it's kind of the next kind of question I had here, which are like, what are the common mistakes, and maybe just like to put in the same thing, the common the kind of the habits that like you see that really like make runners excel. But because I'm sure in both practices you have to see them and like almost be ready to go back and forth, so I'll rephrase that in a better way that like anyone could possibly follow, which is, what are the common mistakes you see in athletes routines, and what are the things that like make healthy runners stay healthy?
yeah, that's a great question. I will kind of caveat this to the fact that
Perfect.
as I was like kind of looking through your list of questions, the healthy runners one is always a little bit hard for me because I spend so much time working with injured runners.
Sure.
Um, but I was kind of thinking of like my friends, I guess, and the athletes I coach who kind of never get hurt, right? There's those like anomaly runners who like never get hurt. Do you think I should do injured first or healthy first?
Well, let's do injured first. The healthy people, they're just like happily running out there right now. So we'll start with the injured people. So
Yeah.
the common mistakes that we see in athletes' routines.
I would say the biggest mistake I see people make is going too hard on their easy runs. There's like literally almost, I would say, actually, I take that back. There is no benefit from running too fast on your easy runs. If anything, it hurts. It's almost impossible to go too slow on your easy runs, but it's very easy to go too fast and start to kind of toe that line of overtraining.
Yeah.
And then again, you're kind of best case scenario, you're never fully recovering and you're never able to kind of reach your full capacity in a workout. So you're kind of staying in this like in between zone where like your hard runs can never truly be as hard as you want because you're never truly recovering. And that's best case scenario. I
Yeah.
would say worst case scenario is you get injured. You end up with, tendonitis or a stress fracture or torn something, and your season is, kind of cobbled together, not smooth. So I
Yeah.
would say that's probably the number one. Another one is those runners who only run. That usually works pretty well for a very finite amount of time. But we all reach a point where only running and only running is just not the ticket anymore. And whether that be, incorporating regular strength training, incorporating regular cross training, that kind of varies from person to person. But I do think kind of mixing it up a little bit is a key to longevity in the sport. Um,
Agreed.
Here's another one is that the Peter Pan syndrome. We're 42 and we're kind of still treating our body as if we're still 22, and the stuff that kind of used to work doesn't necessarily work as we get a little bit older and just our body's recovery slows down. So I think acknowledging that is so key and so important and so hard. It's like we're kind of in this world that's like obsessed with like young and youthful and what are all the things I can do to stay young and youthful. So like I think a lot of people, myself included, are kind of in denial of the fact that we're aging. It takes, a level of maturity to, I think, kind of accept that. But knowing that you do need to prioritize recovery more, you need to prioritize sleep more, you need to space out your quality sessions a little bit more. I think is so important. And then kind of the fourth one I had is kind of the really I feel like these are some of the rocks, which is the not enough sleep, not enough fuel. Not fancy,
Sure.
not glamorous, but just basics of like if you're not sleeping enough, if you're not eating enough, if your kind of overall stress levels are a little bit too high.
Yeah. It's kind of funny you mentioned those things. There are a few things in my own life as a guy who's like not as young as I once was either, but that I've identified and I've shared with my one-on-one athletes in the last, and this would be like the last 2 years that like really made breakthroughs for me, which
Mhm.
were one is that I hadn't reduced my paces from like my late 20s. I just like every time I'd start training again, like I went right back to the same pace and I was nowhere near that fitness anymore. Two, I took my easy runs, and for the first time in my life, I made them legitimately easy because I was training for ultra at the beginning of this year, and I noticed that I could go out and run day after day and bigger mileage than I had done in a long time, and was never tired. I didn't hurt. I was able to
Yeah,
like come back and do it again the next day. It was like a breakthrough moment after talking about it for years, but never actually doing it personally.
yeah,
And then the trying to think. I can't. The third thing you mentioned, I was like, oh yeah, that's the exact same thing. But those are perfect topics, perfect suggestions, and easy to implement right away as well.
yeah, yeah.
So we'll leave the healthy runners out of this because they're, like I said, they're out healthily running right now. So we know the things we need to target. It's kind of funny too. Like everybody knows, but you just got to kind of keep going to it. But as Emmy has told you, and I can tell you from personal experience, like if you implement them, it makes a big difference for sure.
The healthy runners are doing all of those things, or they are incredibly genetically blessed and like
Sure.
blessed with perfect for. I would say like the one thing I thought of with that is like I've been watching a lot of Corey McGee's Instagram and her track workouts, and like she just has like the most flawless form of all time. I would say there's like genetically perfectly built to have the perfect running form.
Yeah.
Those people can sometimes handle like really high volume. They're the ones who kind of seem to like recover incredibly. Just God bless them with like Michael Phelps of swimming. We got a few of those in the running world too.
For sure, for sure. So we'll kind of do a little pivot to the book. So the book I think is really cool the
Mhm.
way that you all wrote it, broken up kind of by body part and sections of the book.
Yeah.
And as you know, as I went through it on my first of many perusals, like it's a lot of information, right? So it's amazing because you get all this like takeaways. But I was kind of curious, as like you who have been intimately familiar with like putting this book together, if someone was coming in and like picking this thing up and trying to like find their biggest takeaways, it's like how would you utilize the book to like make quick healthy running habits or long-term healthy running habits for that matter but to, like something you can implement kind of right away? Like, how would you use it as a tool?
Yeah, that's a great question. That really was kind of the goal of the whole book is it's not really meant to be sit down and read like a novel from front to back. It's really meant to be a reference where like
Sure.
if your knees are bugging you, like open to the chapter on knees, read through the chapter on knees. Like the way that we wrote it, there is stuff like specific exercises that you can take away and implement of like, this is proper foam rolling technique. This is some evidence-based exercises that I can do to kind of strengthen around the area around my knees, activate my glutes. Here's the most common causes of knee pain, and here's XYZ on what to do with pictures, descriptions of all the exercises. My patients who read it are like, "Oh, Emmy, I love this because now every time you tell me what to go home and do, I can just find the reference in your book." Um, so I would say that's it, kind of like a
Yeah.
reference with like objectable takeaways from. And I would say too, like, don't wait until you're having trouble walking to like open up the chapter on knees. Like at that point, it might be a little too late. You might need to get in to see a doctor or get in to see a PT in person. But if you are just like, man, I'm like, my calves are pretty tight after my runs, or my knees are a little bit sore after I run, or my hip just feels like, I would say when it's a tightness or like a little bit of what I call kind of like a niggle, just an awareness, that would be to go to the book kind of sooner rather than later. Try to catch it, ahead of time and be more preventative, kind of take that prehab approach.
Agreed. I will say I would recommend to anyone listening to read the whole book front to cover to cover, and then do exactly what Emmy said, which is it's you pick up that knowledge base from the book itself, and then it is because once again the way you all broke it down, it becomes such an easy reference item that my knee hurts, I go to knees, my feet hurt, I go to feet. So it becomes a really incredible reference. So once again, excellent job on the book.
Thank you.
So we're going to take a little kind of a pivot. So we've been accumulating questions from the group here over the last couple of days. So I want to start with some of those kind of big,
Yeah.
broad topic things, but now we're going to get a little bit more specific. The questions, people knew you were coming because the questions were very specific. They've clearly been doing their homework and knew who they were talking to, because these were like the most specific medically based questions I have seen in my like going on multiple years of doing this. So the questions were
Yeah.
excellent. I got as many as I could. And then the ones that we can't get in our conversation today, I'll try to go back and kind of comment on the line. So here we go. We won't waste any more time. So
Okay.
I thought big kind of warm up question. People talk all the time. This is gonna be a foam roller one. So we talk about foam rolling during warm up. Like, how do we do it? Why do we do it? I have seen this done well, poorly, and not at all. So I thought this would be all of ours, myself
Yeah.
included, opportunity to hear you just do a kind of an overview of once again why we do it, what are the correct ways to utilize it, and what should we be doing? Maybe where do you place it in your schedule?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the kind of like the technical scientific reason of like what physiologically is happening pre-run when you foam roll is number one, increasing blood flow to certain key areas, just that kind of pressure when you kind of compress and then come off the way you get with the foam roller, even if you do it like right here to your hand. I push down, I come off. Well, I get a little red dot, right?
Mm.
So you're increasing blood flow. Um, it also is a little bit analgesic, right? So if you have areas that are maybe a little bit more sore, more fatigued, more tired, foam rolling pre helps to kind of like decrease soreness, decrease tension, decrease pain. So you're feeling a little better from the get go. And that can help to prevent compensations in your form. I tell my athletes, my patients to kind of pre run is meant to be a little shorter, a little lighter, not quite as like get in there and really crank away as you might do post. You want to, again, you don't want to go too fast. I feel like people sometimes foam roll really, really quick and like you're really kind of not doing anything, but you definitely don't need to like give yourself like a 10 out of 10 on the pain scale. It should be like a 3 or 4. You also don't need to foam roll every area of your body. I would foam roll the areas that tend to feel a little bit more sore post run or feel a little bit stiffer when you start out. If your left calf tends to just be a little bit tighter, a little bit more sore those first few steps. If you're dealing with maybe a little bit of an Achilles issue, that's not full blown tendonitis, but maybe just some Achilles tightness, then spending a couple minutes foam rolling the calf before you get out there can increase tissue mobility. So you're not going to be getting as much load and stress in the Achilles when you run, and that can make your run more pleasant. It's not going to, you know, be the like, um, what's the word? It's not
No
going to
silver
cure
bullet.
you.
Yeah.
Right. But I do think it's a useful tool in injury prevention or coming back from a surgery or an injury or something. Do you have anything to add to that? I feel like you might have
Well, I
something.
have a follow-up question to that because it
Yeah.
wasn't that long ago, like I don't know, 5 years, that your two choices pre and post run were to stretch or foam roll, and foam roll was like relatively new on the like in
Yeah.
popularity, and like Trigger Point like revolutionized it with like a funky
Mhm.
looking foam roller, like once
Yeah.
again not very long ago. But now there are about a zillion options. I mean, there are guns, there are boots, there are electrodes, there are
Yeah.
hot saunas, cold plunges. Like the
Yeah.
recovery market has exploded,
Yeah.
and something that I feel like I see often, like I don't know if I even fully understand the answer, but people are like, "Oh, don't worry, like I'm warming up, like I foam rolled like before and after my run," and I'm like, "Well,
Mhm.
did you do mobility or stretching?" And they're like, "No, foam rolling." So I'm kind of curious from your perspective because it's like as I see it, it's not a kind of you said, it's not a silver bullet. It's like it doesn't. Your foam rolling is a muscle manipulation, but it's not doing anything to like mobilize the joints. Like if you were to
Right.
think about kind of a warm up and cool down routine, and
Mhm.
I will stop leading you. I was going to let you answer. It's just like what are the components you would choose, and then like how would foam rolling fit into the that mix?
Yeah. So I would say normally, like I tell people to start with a couple minutes of foam rolling right before you kind of get into mobility. That's a great way to get the muscle just a little bit looser. So you're going to get more efficacy out of your dynamic mobility. Um, so again, kind of start with those problem areas, spend a couple minutes foam rolling them, get into your mobility, which static stretching has a small place post exercise. We, and kind of in writing the book, my co-authors and I were talking a lot about how the static stretching has sort of fallen out of vogue,
A little
um,
bit.
to the point where it's kind of just it's been like debunked. Um, but I'll chat in a second about some of the benefits still of static stretching. But yeah, dynamic mobility. I saw someone wrote in there the 3D lunge matrix, the 3D pivots, drills, whatever kind of like getting the hip moving. I think the hip is a key muscle group to target. The hip is such a huge role player in running, and restrictions there can cause. If you're having knee pain, it's probably not your knee's fault. It's probably coming from your hip. Low back pain, probably coming from your hip. So spending some time kind of dynamically, which in the book, if you get the book, there's all sorts of hip mobility. Um, so a little bit of foam rolling, mobilization, kind of dynamic mobilization. I know there's some good Peloton classes on dynamic mobilization too. And then after that, I would follow it up with activation. So if it's core activation, if it's glute activation, if it's whatever you might have been assigned, or if you're not sure what to do, I would say probably glutes, maybe a little bit of core. Most people have sleepy glutes because we're sitting, we're squishing them. Um, and then getting into your easy run, maybe 10-15 minute warm up, and then if you do have like a kind of a quality session or like an interval day, doing some of those drills
Yeah.
would be, in a perfect world, the ideal warm up.
Uh, Agreed all around. And to just second your point, hips probably 9 out of 10, if not 19 out of 20 of the runner related issues like I see on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. As once again, as you said, doesn't manifest itself in the hip every time. Knee pain, 9 out of 10 coming from the hips. And we're in this culture where we're just seated so much, which one just the worst postures for locking up those hips. So, you know, just to one more time, second Emmy is, if you're being
Yeah.
mobile through the hip, it's going to be hugely important. Someone just mentioned sleepy glutes. If your hip's locked up, the glutes can't activate. It's got to be able to get some mobilization in there. So I'm with you. It's and that is how I always ask athletes to do it as well. Is start with foam rolling to kind of warm up their muscles, get it
Mhm.
that basically gentle massage, uh,
Mhm.
move on to the activations and the kind of 3D lunge matrix series or calf matrix series, and finish with either some mobilizations or a little bit of static stretching as well. So good to know I'm not far off the mark. So we'll jump on to the next question here. So this one is going to focus on women's health, a
Yeah.
something that you are very passionate about, something that gets basically no attention in the general like fitness space, but is obviously hugely important into our demographic in particular. Is hugely important as we work with a lot of women.
Yeah.
So the question was to touch on women's health, specifically perimenopause and training, addressing fatigue, even if we're feeling that we're not pushing our runs and or amount of runs too much. Starting to notice certain symptoms of peri and how it's affecting my training. Would love to get on top of it before it gets potentially worse. I'm also noting it's taken me much longer to recover from harder workouts, longer runs than it used to. This is a longevity training for me and not racing. I want to enjoy the stage of my life and not dread it. So I'm very interested, as I've have for many years told you that I would like to allow you to talk more about like women's related sports issues. So this will be the first of hopefully many times to come. So we'll turn it over if you have thoughts on that kind of peri, and many menopause period.
Yeah, that's it is tricky. That's definitely a tough um area to navigate. I do find we're starting to get more research on that, but that's been an area that's typically been ignored because it's complicated. It's hard to regulate, it's kind of hard to form research studies, and because of that there hasn't been a lot poured into that. That's changing. I'm sure, John, I know you're familiar with Dr. Stacey Sims, who's like, a huge name in the endurance community, the fitness community. And she has kind of a specific focus on peri and postmenopausal women. She's got some great courses online on that. I've read a little bit of her stuff. I have more to read on that, but I would say like one kind of common theme that is becoming, I in my world, which is probably a skewed sense of the world, but is becoming more and more talked about and prevalent, is women as we get older doing like heavy lifting, not just like your band work and the glute stuff at the gym, not just kind of like your strength for runners, but like deadlifts, like with a trap bar, squatting with the bar, like doing more of these kind of Olympic lifting movements and like loading your body. Not obviously don't start there. You need to work your way up. Starting with 2 10-pound dumbbells is amazingly good, and you work your way up. But if you can do that heavy loading, that kind of counters what's happening as we age, which is that your muscles, it's the opposite of hypertrophy.
Okay.
Like
Growing,
opposite
thinking.
of uh,
I was like,
yeah. So as we get older, our body is like aging is essentially like the slow dehydration of our tissues. So we get not as good at like absorbing fluids, absorbing fluid. And so our muscles are kind of just like the mass is like going down. And that's to your point why you feel like you're not as powerful, you're not as recovering as well. But by doing that heavy lifting, we can counter that. Especially if it's not something you've done forever. If it's something you start to add in, I find you can make pretty tremendous gains on that front, to the point where you're performing not far from where you used to be. Um, so I think incorporating that, it's kind of like the way to think of it is it's like giving your body a bigger buffer zone, right? If you're doing this heavier lifting, then running's not the hardest stress that you're dealing with on a regular basis. You're doing things that are taxing those muscles more in a different way that give them more capacity to respond to the loads of running. So that I think is one. Another one is like really, really, really honing in on fueling and protein intake. Um, that might be even to the point like that's a little bit outside of my scope. I don't know as many of the specifics as that I want, but there's some great, registered dietitians, nutritionists out there who can help you kind of optimize your fueling. But there is, I think, a key for a lot of people is just protein intake and the fact, kind of same kind of thing, your body's not absorbing it as well as it used to. So different strategies to kind of increase your body's ability to absorb nutrients. Um, and then spacing out your workouts a little bit more. If you used to kind of, if you're used to doing like a Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday kind of thing, you might want to talk with your coach about switching to like a 9-day training cycle, or maybe targeting like 2 key workouts a week. So you're like giving your body more of that like 48 to maybe even like 72-hour window to recover so that you're able to like hit that next effort hard.
Yeah, I'm with you. Great points all around. Stacy Sims, yeah, certainly is one person that's looking into it, shining a light on a lot of stuff. So a great
Yeah.
resource for sure. She was, I think, a professional triathlete as well as being a doctor. I can't remember exactly. I'm sure Ryan will appreciate, but yeah, the strength training. You know,
Yeah.
there's strength and there's power. Strength, we all as adults lose. I can't remember the exact specifics, so I won't try to quote them here. Strength we lose, power we lose even faster. So the big, jumps and
Yeah.
you know other power moves that have to do with the daily activities of living to keep that power high is really important. As all of us age. So, just great points. And, once again, would look up those resources, but that's hopefully some good spot to start there.
Yeah.
So let's jump into our next one here. So it's going to be a little like training specific. So this one I think is very cool. I'm gonna ask the question, then I'm gonna try to expound upon it a little bit, which is
Mhm.
how should we work in a race event into a marathon training plan? So for example, if my plan calls for a 16-mile long run, but I have a 10-mile race the same weekend, should I avoid the pace and add the 6 miles at the end? So there's the question. And I'm going to add in because I love athletes to race during training,
Mhm.
especially at events that the race distance is applicable, like 15K and
Yeah.
beyond to the marathon, maybe even 10K and beyond to the marathon.
Yeah.
So if in the middle of marathon training plan, you had an athlete with a 10-mile race,
Mhm.
yeah, we didn't specify the race here.
Bronx 10 miler.
how would you
They're
kind
training
of,
for New York City and they want to race the Bronx 10 miler.
yeah, perfect. We'll use that as an example. So would you have them go after it and race, or would you have them if they had a 16 miler, kind of run it easy and use it as an easy run to tack on miles after? Like, how would you incorporate races into a marathon training plan?
I mean, that's definitely one of those questions that's a little bit of the like, it depends on the
Sure.
athlete experience level, how many marathons they've run, how good they are with volume. If they're trying to race the marathon, if they're trying to complete the marathon. Um, probably what I would first do is maybe do a little bit of a workaround if there's a way that we can switch the 16 miler to the weekend before or the weekend after so they're able to just do the race. I'm not the biggest fan of like tacking on mileage after a race in order to get that total like mileage for the day. I find like those miles become such junk miles. And 8 out of 10 times we end up running that race effort harder than we're supposed to. If coach says do it at this pace, you get kind of
Sure.
caught up in that race atmosphere. You end up pushing a little harder, and then afterward you're zonked, and then you're trying to do this 6 mile long run, and it kind of just like disintegrates. And at least that's what happens to me. Does that happen to you?
Well, you're very fast, Emmy. So your race face spells determination. So we know that when you go out, you're running hard.
Yeah.
But
Um,
yes, no, I think it happens to everybody. You get in the competitive spirit of the race. I've had athletes do it. I tend to like a lot of times of going on to doing it in the warm up sometimes if I have an athlete like you're talking about that I know can't hold back, where I'm like,
mhm.
great, you're going to run 6 miles before the race and then go as hard as you want for 10 miles. I personally, I'm with you. When I see the finish line, I don't want to keep running.
No.
It's mentally built in here. That's where to stop. So to I have done it in the past, and it always feels very weird. Everybody's stopping, picking up medals, and you keep on
Mhm.
running. But now I tend to put it on the beginning for a lot of athletes.
Yeah. I think probably like an optimal approach to a situation like that would be to do the 6 miles as a warm up if time allows. You could maybe run to the start of the race, build in a little bit of time for that kind of extended warm up, do those 6 miles pretty easy. And then if you're training for a marathon, that's a great sort of like dress rehearsal for the race of like, can you
Sure.
hold marathon goal pace for those 10 miles? You can kind of practice your fueling, you can practice your gel intake, you can kind of practice that like race atmosphere. Um, I think that that's a pretty safe and beneficial approach for a lot of runners. Or you can talk with your coach about maybe doing more of like a progression run. I do think something that's like pretty key for any races that are run in season. I mean, this is key for all races, but especially if they're not the goal race. One thing that makes recovery brutal is when you kind of blow up, starting too fast and then kind of struggle busing to the end. Your recovery from that race is going to take a lot longer than if you start a little bit easier and you negative split and you finish strong. You're not going to have that like week or so where you're just feeling kind of sluggish and kind of off. You're going to bounce back a lot quicker. And that's really important if you're in the middle of a training cycle, right? You don't want to lose
Yeah.
all this downtime and your workout on Wednesday is bad because you didn't race very well on Saturday or Sunday. So I think definitely like making it a little bit more of a progression run, starting a little bit more conservative, and then yeah, if you want to push the last 2 to 3 miles to a pretty fast clip, you're not doing that too early. So I think that's also pretty important.
Yeah, and I'm with you. It naturally, it always depends. Depends is like the truest answer. I will
Yeah,
say, what I like about having athletes race in season, and once again,
yeah,
it really when the race is applicable to the race distance. So for the marathon, in my opinion, it's like 10K and up. Is there's a practice to racing, right? Like there's a practice to like what you have for breakfast, getting into a starting corral, navigating a crowd, drinking water from a cup. There's also a practice of like being able to push yourself to an uncomfortable level and then hold that level for an extended period of time in a way that like it's pretty hard to replicate in training unless you are very self-motivated.
yeah,
So what I see, I think sometimes is a mistake in athletes, is that they'll, especially the marathon, it takes 6 months to train for these things. And if you race once every 6 months, like that is a lot of pressure on one day. It takes like some practice, it takes some practice to like get up to there.
yeah.
And then kind of Emmy mentioned the more particular you are with pace goals as well.
Hmm.
Oh boy, like it is if you're like putting all your hopes on show up at one day and then run a pace at a distance that you've never run before, like that is a lot to put on a single day. So I love having people, and it absolutely depends like how comfortable you are with the distance, how comfortable you are with racing, what is the
Hmm.
recovery time. And so working with a coach, you get to certainly someone who knows and understands that. But ultimately, I like having athletes race in season, and you naturally, as we've kind of discussed different things, have to figure out the goal of what those races are, and there are a lot of different ways to do
Yeah, and even like I'm a big fan of like a pretty hard effort and a half as a part of like the marathon build.
it. Yeah.
There's so many times where like race day for a marathon, like Chicago or New York this year, it ends up being 80 degrees, and you're like, I spent 4, 5, 6 months of my life for this one day, and it's just shit. Um, and I've even myself, I've had some like Boston's that have been super hot, or I've blown up in the marathon, but I've like raced a half, gotten a really like a PR in the half as a part of the marathon training, and I'm like, well, I did get a nice half PR, so it can also be a little bit of like a consolation prize, or you can kind of flip that. So like after you've trained for the marathon, if the marathon didn't go quite as planned, you still have that huge array of fitness. So maybe it's taking that marathon training, scaling down a little bit, looking for a half, and the next couple weeks to months, and kind of taking that huge aerobic base that you've gotten from the marathon training and kind of channeling it into something else. But I agree with your point 100% that especially a lot of like the athletes that we coach that are doing so much on their own, right? They don't,
Yeah.
you're out there, you're doing these workouts like, oh, I froze. You're doing these workouts by yourself, and it's incredibly hard to push yourself and motivate, I think. And I have like mad respect for the athletes who are out there by themselves, at 5 a.m. in the dark, like crushing those miles. But I find you can kind of like reach a whole nother level when you're in that race setting.
For sure. And kind of my final thought on this is, because you mentioned that, like what I have, when I've raced successfully in the marathon, I've always raced successfully in half marathons leading up to that race. I mean,
Yeah.
I have run bad halves, and it is also signaled that I was about to run a bad marathon. I didn't realize at the time, but I know now. The marathon in particular, because we have a bunch of people who are doing marathons and then
Yeah.
always their first time marathoners. This particular season, I'm coaching a lot of first time marathoners.
Mhm.
It is a weird race. Like you can be prepared to the nth degree, and it just doesn't turn out. I'm trying to like the last big race Kipchoge ran. I mean, he's the favorite by a ton, and he
Yeah.
just like missed a water bottle and then dropped off the pack. Like little things can happen. It's just hard, and so that's why just to really hammer it home, hanging the entire race season on like a single race is tough. And if that race is a marathon, to the point of I was with Emmy last year's New York City. I've never been more happy to not be running a race on a certain day. Like my FOMO is usually out of control, and I had none of it last year. It was
Nope.
terrible.
Nope.
So it just things can go a little askew.
Yeah.
All right, we'll keep going here. Maybe try to get through these things. So this is a kind of an injury related issue
Uh-huh.
here. So it said after my last half marathon, I'm coming back from injury. First, shout out to the amazing pre-run lunge matrix stretch, which is a game changer. So mobilization, movement. Second, I know you recommend to work on either improving speed or building distance, but not at the same time. Do you favor improving one first over the other? My preference is to work on speed and then to add base on top of it. And then what I think is really the interesting thing here is, are there dangers for older athletes? And this person was 54 with a history of injury in terms of incorporating either. So sort of to put it, kind of reframe it, it's, when coming back, we have injury prone athlete who wants,
Yeah.
looking at the option of working on speed and
Yeah.
or base volume. What's your recommendations here?
So that is a amazing question. Kudos to whoever. I don't know who submitted this, but I like love you. Your head's so in the right place with all of your thought process. You really, that's a little bit tricky because I think you can make, and you would probably agree with me, John, that you could make a strong argument for both. Like you can make a
Sure.
strong argument for working on speed first and then adding in the volume, or adding in the volume, working on the speed. I think the argument for working on speed first is that you're gonna get more efficient, you're gonna get stronger, you're gonna improve your running economy. And then as you start to crank up the distance, you're running probably a little bit faster. So as a whole, that's less time on your feet. If you then start to transition to say a marathon and you've worked on speed and you've worked on economy, your 18-mile run might not be 3.5 hours, it might be 3 hours or 2 hours and 45 minutes. So that kind of cumulatively is a little bit less stress on the system. Um, I would just say, like, you probably want a little bit of a balance. Like, I would say speed, then volume with a little bit of base volume. I wouldn't just like, you've been injured, you're coming back, especially older, as we get older, weakness, all these things we've kind of talked about. I would, get a decent, like, and there's not like a set number, but I would say, maybe running 5 days a week for roughly an hour pretty comfortably, and then starting to add back in speed. I think would be probably the happy medium. But I would suggest speed and economy and hill repeats and 200-meter repeats and strides and drills and kind of all those things before really going after high volume and long distance stuff.
Yeah, I'm with you. This is something that my ideology changed within the last five years or so. I was listening to a presentation being given because the tried and true way is like start to run easy, start to run easy, start to run easy, start to run easy, and someone was like, I don't know, in my opinion, a lot easier to run a hard 200 and then like have a walking rest than like run for 30 minutes consecutively.
Yeah.
And as a guy, it's just been always like I take for granted pretty much just been able to run for 30 minutes consecutively. Like
Yeah.
that I was taking for granted in some athletes. So it made me rethink about it a lot of I'm kind of with you. Like I do want athletes, I don't want to take a first time athlete and give them speed work. Like maybe what I might do is start with walk run and walk
Yeah.
and move from walk run to fast run walk, and then move from fast run walk
Yeah.
back to continuous run. with something like that. But it's an interesting question, and kind of to the her last question here. So, do you see any real danger for basically master athlete, which is anyone over 40, by the way, master's athlete, to
Yeah.
be going and like picking up speed work?
I think as long as like I wouldn't like to your point, you wouldn't want to be from an injury to the track running 200s. That might be a little too extreme. You'll probably blow a hammy. But if you kind of ease your way into it, no. And incorporating the strength training, incorporating that plyometric work to give yourself that bigger buffer. If you're doing heavy stuff in the weight room, if you're doing jumps and things like that, then you're I think you're that kind of conditioning aspect of it, I think you're good to go. The other point I think that I want to make, we kind of already said this, but like when you're running a little bit quicker, your form does tend to clean up a little bit. So if you are a little bit more injury prone, like you're probably going to be better off. And even like if you're doing your first kind of like set of like walk run, even my athletes who maybe I give them for the first time after an injury, run a minute, walk a minute. I don't. I like to call it like interval versus walk run. I feel like interval just like feels more athletic. I'm like, okay, and I do this with my pregnant and my postpartum patients too. Where that 1 minute, you're not sprinting, but you're not just jogging. It's a little bit more brisk. You're kind of thinking about form because if you're going out there for your first time, you're just kind of like plodding really slow through 30 minutes at 11:30, 12, 13-minute pace or something like that. Like your form is just not going to be that great. And so working a little bit faster, a little bit brisker, kind of doing that like interval based stuff can reduce your risk of injury
Yeah.
and is better on the joints and things like that.
I'll say I'm a run walk or a run interval convert over the last many
Yeah.
years. There was something during I had to do a 120-mile week in the middle of pandemic. I didn't have to. It was like I had nothing else to do, so that was what I
Yeah.
decided to do. And I realized like I could cover just a lot of distance and make my run
Mhm.
much more pleasurable. And now in hot weather, which you've been with me on some hot weather, like I am a terrible hot weather runner, so it's kind of baked into my plan sometimes now, and it doesn't mean I don't feel bad about it. Like if I'm going out and I want volume, especially like we think about marathon training, it's not
Yeah.
just the miles, it's the time on feet. And if I'm looking at 80, 90 degrees with high humidity, I'm going in a lot of times with sections of planned run walk, and that I found I could take a session that was going to be a total bust and make it successful by implementing a strategy like that. It was a little bit of a tiniest hurdle, but I was just seeing athletes be so successful with it that I finally gave it a try. And now,
Yeah.
so I'm a convert to the run interval.
Interval. Yeah. Your athletes will feel much more like athletes if you tell them the interval. It's a mind game. Um, yeah. Today, my run in the park, it was interval run to the next water fountain. It was get to the next water fountain. Okay, you made it. Okay, you got half miles to the next water fountain, and
Yeah,
it was a. I ran at like 2 o'clock today. It was like 94 degrees. It was an easy, and that's it, like
yeah.
it's okay to take walk breaks on your easy runs. Like you take walk breaks. I was walking on my easy run today. Um,
I,
not
I you,
anything.
we should make t-shirts. Walking on easy runs, no problem.
Nope.
Happy to walk on an easy run. I like to keep my walk short. I've kind of shared this before, like 30 seconds or less, and my heart rate doesn't come all the way down. But it's if especially in the conditions like this, it's your only option to like make the effort feel better is to take a little bit of a rest, get the water, wipe the sweat off, and then go back to it. And once again, if that can take a day where you're going to throw in the towel and get you an extra like 20, 30 minutes onto your run or extra 10
Yeah.
minutes onto your run, that was a win because your heart rate won't settle in that short break. You end up staying in
Yeah.
zone the whole time, even though you're taking the walk, and you're kind of the ideology certainly around it as well. If you're doing it as a planned effort, is that the energy late makes up for some of the
Mhm.
reduced speed early. So, which I have always found to be pretty true.
Yeah. Or like if it is really hot, you probably most of you guys are not out in the middle of the day, but if you are, like your heart rate's gonna climb and it's gonna climb higher than you want it on an easy run. Taking a couple minutes to let it come back down to a more reasonable level. That was me. I was like getting up to like the 150s, close to 160, and I was like, "Ooh, this is my easy day. I gotta like let that come down." I got it back to like 125, and then onward I went.
Which is a good reminder because my easy day heart rate like caps at 164. So different people, different heart rate ranges. Not everybody just fits into the Garmin mold. So just a
Yeah.
good little reminder.
Yep. And your heart rate will be higher on easy runs in the summer. That's not something to be that alarmed about. You're sweating more, fluid intake, stuff like that. There's a lot of things that factor in. Like I tell everyone, heart rate is a tool in the toolbox, but it's not by any means the only one. And especially with running, like less so biking. You don't make you don't go on heart rate alone.
Sure. Yeah, I'm a big fan. I like to refer to it as like a comparative metric. Like I like to look at it after the fact for me and my athletes, but it's something that I very rarely go by personally or give to an athlete to track by. So let's jump into the next question here, which is actually about running shoes, which people love running shoes, but I think this is a very applicable one because everybody should be like kind of right in the middle of their running season. So people are doing endurance, are starting to like log big miles. It's Berlin. Obviously, people are already in big miles. So the question here is how frequently do you get new shoes? Should you use different shoes for different types of runs? So easy run, speed run, treadmill run versus outdoors, etc.
Yeah, I'm a fan of kind of working towards, again, everything should be gradual. You don't just want to like dive into stuff like this. You kind of need to like let your body adapt. But I'm a big fan of a variety of footwear. A shoe for your workout days, a shoe for racing, a recovery shoe, a long run shoe. In the sense, just because running is such a repetitive movement, like monotonous sport where you're kind of doing the same thing over and over. It's not like basketball or tennis where you're shifting and pivoting and like kind of moving in like different directions. You're like in the same plane doing the same motion over and over and over and over. And I think shoes is one of the very small ways that we can introduce just a little bit more variety to kind of load tendons a little bit differently, load our system a little bit differently, and kind of create a little bit more like adaptations. Um, Depending on like what type of injury you're coming back from, if you're coming back from an injury, there's pros like Achilles tendonitis, plantar fasciitis. If you're more acute, having a shoe with like a higher profile, more of kind of that heel toe drop, is beneficial. You're kind of protecting it a little bit, but you'll reach a point where you need to start to mobilize it, and opting for more of like a minimal drop shoe can be beneficial.
Mhm.
And same thing with like kind of building strength, right? Like if you're today, I did my easy run and my Kinvars, which I have like a 4 millimeter drop. Just super slow.
Yeah.
I ran for an hour, but having that shoe a little bit more minimal, I think, kind of helps like mobilize my planner, which is always a little bit pesky. Um, other days I'm in my Brooks Ghost if I just need something a little bit more cushy, a little bit more supportive. Um, there's a lot of stuff that's like hot topic right now is the carbon plate shoes and pros and cons of the carbon plate shoes, training in them, racing in them. But I do think kind of, not just if you've only been running in like 10 millimeter drop shoes, you don't want to go and purchase an ultra zero drop shoe and start running in that all the time, but like maybe kind of starting to work some different shoes into your routine can be beneficial.
Yeah. Any drawbacks?
Any drawbacks? I think doing it too quickly, like,
Yeah.
or if you have any kind of injury, you'd probably want to like talk with your physical therapist or coach a little bit about it. Because depending on kind of where you are, like you might need something a little bit more supportive.
Mhm. Yeah, that's all I was kind of. It's
Um,
yeah. The only thing I want to make sure people got is like, especially if you're coming back from injury and you just kind of hit it, is like, is sometimes I like athletes to eliminate variables. So and have
Mhm.
someone come in, have that just had like an ankle twist, and we're trying, or like a ankle tendonitis, trying to figure out like what the deal is, and they're like, well, I use these like three different shoes we're rotating through. I'll have them like go down to a single shoe so we can try to see if the shoe itself, like if a shoe itself is the issue.
Yeah.
Um, but kind of to Emmy's point, it's anytime you want to implement a new shoe, which I do think is a good idea for all the reasons that she mentioned, is just want to be very, very thoughtful about the volume in which you're adding. So just a couple miles at a time. Like I will literally for like brand new shoes that I have not never worn before, like new models of shoes, I'll like wear for my warm up and then take off and I'll run my set and then I'll put back on for my cool down because that might be enough to like irritate the bottom of my foot. It's like because I don't know the break in time, I don't know how stiff and rigid. Similar, like I wear a shoe indoors, which is the Kinvara. I used to wear them outdoor for marathons and everything, but now I got older, so I can't wear that neutral shoe anymore. I need a little bit something else because my feet were just beaten up at the end. So it changes with age as well. But
I
I like the neutral shoe inside, a little bit stiffer shoe outside, especially when I'm gonna do a long run. I want my feet to be a little bit more protected. But just be thoughtful about like also swapping too much from brand to brand and model to model to model. It can
yeah.
start to be a tricky and very expensive cycle.
I'm with you. The Kinvara used to be my racing shoe until the age of the super shoes, but I still love it. It's still part of my collection.
um, we'll see. Yeah, as a master, Christy Wilkie says she also has to rethink her shoes. So as master runners, everybody needs master running shoes. But yes, the super shoe is a good one. So we're coming towards the end here. I should someone very specifically quoted or asked about a passage in the book, which I know you might turn around to me, but Run Healthy, chapter 15, periodization stage 4, super compensation. Is that like week 5 workout after a week 4 taper, or super compensation something more annual? So did you want me to take this one?
I'm gonna let John wrote a quite good blog post for the website on that one. So I'm gonna let you. I also didn't write that chapter, so
Fair.
I'm gonna let you
So,
take this.
so I won't be brief on super compensation, but I thought it was such a specific question that it couldn't go without an answer. So super compensation is a theory, first and foremost, so which many people find dissatisfying, that it's not necessarily a finite answer. The super compensation theory has to do with basically progressive overload. It has 4 steps written in the book Run Healthy. Step 1 is applying stress. So if when Emmy gives me a run to go and do, stress is applied to me, and we'll say for sake of this, I'm starting on baseline. So I'm on baseline. I'm applied the stress of working out. That stress is going to take me beneath baseline. So I'm in a recovery phase. That recovery phase for most people tends to be about 24 hours. It obviously depends how long the effort is. So I know a lot of smartwatches are kind of starting to guess at this a bit. I don't know if you've
Yeah,
ever noticed, like you finish a workout and Garmin's like come back on like 3 days from now. That's their guess, but it tends to be 24 hours for most people on like a tough average workout. It's not like a big race. So what happens is in that 24-hour cycle, you're recovering. And for a very brief period, your body will make adaptations because it wants to get ready to handle that stress again in the future. So we'll push it past baseline. And so when you push past baseline, you're in what is called your super compensation phase. And what you want then is to be able to come in and apply the next training stress in that super compensation phase. Because then you can start to get this like ladder effect of progressive overload where your body's making adaptations to get better and get stronger. So there's not a finite way to figure out exactly what the stress is. It's absolute worth. You have to know your body, worth working with a coach to try to figure it out, to know how much is too much. I think if anything, over the course of time, as I got questioned a lot about that first article, the important thing to know, and I think maybe the most important part of it, is that the timing of your week matters. And what I mean by that is people have busy lives and it becomes very easy to be like, I did this workout on Monday, but everything else I had to push back to Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So I got my 4 runs in, so I'm good. And then I'll turn around and like start again on Monday. And that's all good and well. And it's better than not. You did get it all in the week, which for most of us is about as good as we can do sometimes, but not necessarily getting the maximum advantage of if it was evenly spaced throughout the weeks with very thoughtful kind of pushes and pullbacks and then re-pushes that kind of allow that hard effort recovery, etc. So that's sort of the why people are so thoughtful about laying out a week in the way that they do that allows you really strong efforts followed by recovery phases followed by other hard efforts. So that's where I will kind of lead people on super compensation. I think that blog post is still out there in the world. You can go and also grill me on it might be on our website somewhere, but I'll see if I can find it and post it. So we're 55 minutes in. So for everyone's sake, no one's going to listen to us talk more than 60 minutes. So I wanted to just kind of turn it over to you right here at the end here. As I've kind of brought up earlier, I think most athletes are in like the thick of their training calendar. Any big takeaway items, like pieces of advice for like, here's, take these nuggets and take them forward to the rest of your training and racing season.
Yeah, I think a big one at this point in training, again, like you said, John, we're kind of in the middle of it. If you have a week or 2 weeks that like go to shit, don't freak out. There's every training cycle has some built-in buffer. You have that buffer. Not every run is going to be perfect. Some are not going to be great. Don't let that discourage you. Don't let that me think like, oh, I can't do this. Like that's part of the process. So I think kind of trying to like let those what's Ted Lasso be a goldfish.
Oh, yeah.
Um, I think that can be really helpful at this point. Also, like we are in the dog days of summer. July and August are the most miserable time of year to run. It is not fun. It is a slog. It does not feel great, but you got to keep telling yourself the work you put in now will pay off when we start to get those amazing fall days that are coming for us in October, November. So I think kind of keep at it. Focus on your recovery. Recovery, you don't get stronger when you train, you get stronger when you recover. That's something I tell everyone. Training is breakdown, breakdown, breakdown. It's little micro tears, micro fractures in your bones. So you got to prioritize the recovery. Recovering as hard as you train is how you reap the benefits of all of the hard work that you're putting into your training.
That's it. Couldn't have said it better. Won't try. So, Emmy, thank you so much. A pleasure to chat. I always enjoy our time getting to chat, and I'm sure
Me
other people are
too,
going to take
John.
it
You're
from there.
fun to talk with.
Well, everyone, have an amazing week. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll see you soon.
Yeah, thanks everyone for tuning in. We had a great crowd participation.
Yes, indeed. I got to go back and check some of these comments here, but
Yeah.
see you soon, Emmy.